Nā tāne kimi nā nai rapu nā nai rangahau te māramatanga kia puta tātou ki te whiiau ki te marama whānau. Whānau hara mai te tō ki o haumi e hui e, tāiki e. This week on The Hui.
Māori creatives are fighting to take their whale taonga in and out of Aotearoa.
That taonga is carrying the voice of that tohora across generations.
An international convention is making it near impossible to travel with their taonga.
We had the situation where only a matter of days before travelling, we got the letter, US Customs permits declined.
And Ngāti Whakaue Potter Caleb Ngātai is a clay creative.
You start off with a ball of clay and then from there you can literally make anything.
Discovering pottery after one of his darkest times, but now sharing his journey through his business, Caleb's Cups.
Te hunga kua riro ki tapoko te rangi hara mai haere. Tātou kei te pito ora ti hewa mauri ora, and welcome back to The Hui. Taonga carved from whale materials are a symbol of mana and prestige across the Pacific. But harvesting whales, even if they're beached, is banned or stringently controlled across Te Moananui-a-Kiwa, including here in Aotearoa. And an international convention means Māori creatives are finding that taking these taonga in and out of the country is fraught. Mea nei te kōrero, Amiriana Johnson.
Every part of the tohora is made use of to honour the life of that tohora.
Tohora, ko ngā rangatira o te moana.
Every nation in the Pacific has a relationship with whales.
From their final resting place on our shores, they're given life again through these taonga. A mihi to the unbreakable connection Māori have with the moana.
That taonga is carrying the voice of that tohora across generations.
We had a beautiful blue whale come in 2021 in our tribal area here in Taranaki Iwi.
This whale was a tipuna kuia.
So Te Karu o Kōteoteo was a baleen whale rather than a toothed whale. The process of revitalising that practice of working with the baleen and the sinew has been based on knowing that our tupuna made use of every part of the tohora. Those practices have been lost for generations.
Sinew is the fibrous tissue connecting the muscle and bone. This is what it looks like after it's been dried and processed.
It's organic material. It still goes through a process of change and components of it breaking down. So it's getting the material to a point where it's stable so that it can be worked.
You didn't know how to do that at the start?
No. It was a real process of experimentation and trialling, really.
Muopoko carver Sean Montgomery-Neutze worked closely with ngāhina to learn the ropes.
This is a piece of the baleen in its raw form. The next stage would be processing it, cleaning it off, but it's essentially a section of the baleen here.
And that's from inside the mouth?
Yes. Yeah. The filters on the baleen whale.
What's the texture like?
Well, it's keratin, so similar to your fingernail, but a lot thicker. You know, you can sort of see there are multiple sort of plates stacked together. These will be separated off, cleaned off and processed.
And from the body and bones of the Taranaki whale, Te Karu o Kōteoteo, these taonga were born.
This part here is the baleen. Called them poihihi because hihi is the kupu for baleen. When we create taonga pūoro or poihihi, that taonga is carrying the voice of that tohora across generations.
Here at the prestigious Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture, they plan to showcase their taonga Māori to the world. Ngā Hina Shan, along with respected carvers Bernard Makuare and Rangi Kipa, travelled to Hawaii. But their taonga did not.
We had the situation where only a matter of days before travelling, we got the letter, US Customs permits declined.
Doc was gutted that we couldn't help the artists in this particular case to be able to travel with their taonga.
This is where the rubber hits the road. The Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, or CITES for short, was introduced by the UN in 1975 to protect endangered species globally. Almost all marine mammals, including whales, are protected under this convention. So taking taonga made out of whale material in or out of the country is near impossible. However, if US Customs was prepared to allow the taonga in, Doc would have issued a permit to let it out. Why were those permits declined?
The US law does not allow any whalebone or whale specimens to be imported.
No exceptions?
No exceptions.
Unless the whale material is from before the law came into effect.
Without an import permit, there was nothing that we could do.
And so we had to kind of quickly pivot and create something, a bit of an activation.
It was Shan's first time at the festival. They had to show photos of the taonga instead.
We did literally have red tape stuck to the photos, and of course, people picked up on that immediately.
This is a Pacific-wide problem.
We know Fiji has suffered from the same sort of problems that we have with tambua, or the whale tooth. We know that Hawaii had exactly the same thing with the reineho, or leineho palawa.
These Indigenous creatives want to share their taonga freely.
We're constantly going to be told by politics that it's too hard, there's too many things to do, too many barriers. CITES means that that's just too hard, so just don't do it. You know, find an alternative. And we're going to say to them, well, you know, that's not good enough.
Does it serve us to be part of this international convention when it hinders Māori?
So look, I think the answer to that is absolutely yes, because we would not want a free-for-all on the trade in our precious species like kakapo or whales that come to our shores, or other Indigenous species as well.
Doc is exploring options, although nothing has been formally proposed.
There is an exception, for example, in CITES around musical instruments, and, you know, we're wondering whether there is something that could exist, something like a cultural items passport.
Domestically, there is still constraints around the actual harvesting of whale material. It's illegal without a permit.
In the early days in the 80s, when whales would wash up, it would be standoffs on the beach between the representatives of the Crown who own the mammals when they beach, and the people who have connection with those places, the tangata whenua.
Ultimately, it is wrong that for us to embody our customary practices, we're seen as breaking the law. The use of tohora materials is going to continue.
So there are a range of domestic laws that impact on that. The government of the day and the parliament can look at making changes.
It's more than art. This is whakapapa.
The material of whale teeth is just a stunning material. There's nothing like it. It forces you to do something that's greater than what you did before. You know, you talk to any Māori person that wears a taonga, it's not just an accessory. It's something that's emotionally really important to them. And actually what we're trying to do is reflect our own natural heritage and our birthright.
Hara mai te kōrero, and a big mihi to all those who supplied footage for Meriana's story. 3 whakaata Māori and te reo te uru tēnā koutou katoa. After the break, we talk treaty principles and the Waitangi Tribunal decision, Māori wards and Crown-Māori relations. Our kai kōrero, Professor Carly Quinns and lecturer Kendra Cox are in the studio next. Ko te hui tēnei e wete ana I ngā kōrero nui o te wā. The furore surrounding Māori rights and interests has hit the spotlight again, particularly after the full-page ads in places like the NZ Herald from groups like Hobson's Pledge. And we've also had the report from the Waitangi Tribunal into why 3300. So joining me now are the Dean of the School of Law at AUT University, Ahorangi, Professor Kylie Quince, and Auckland University lecturer at the Faculty of Education and Social Work, Kendra Cox. Tēnā korua. No mai. Let's get into it. The Waitangi Tribunal report on Friday released its interim report into Y3300, the Treaty Principles Bill, and it recommended that the bill be abandoned. Ahorangi, peheo whakaro?
Well, nothing surprising, I think, out of that report. The poor tribunal's been under the gun for the last few months, writing similar reports about a number of kaupapa. They say it's discriminatory, doesn't appropriately honour te tiriti, it abandons both the text and the principles of te tiriti, so nothing surprising there, I don't think, but good work nonetheless.
Kendra?
Kia ora, yes, exactly. Not a surprise at all. One thing that came through really strongly in the interim report was the Waitangi Tribunal saying that this is only a political and ideological attack on te tiriti o Waitangi and on te ao Māori generally. This is not based on evidence, much like every other, kind of reform policy, legislative reform that this government has tried to ram through very quickly under urgency, and it's purely political.
What do you think will happen next? I mean, do we think that the government might pay a little attention to the recommendations in this report, Ahorangi, or will it just carry on?
Well, I mean, politically we know that the Prime Minister has already said that neither he nor New Zealand First are committed to supporting the bill past its first reading. This is purely part of a coalition agreement. But of course this does provide an opportunity for Prime Minister Chris Luxon to show some leadership and actually show some commitment to te tiriti by withdrawing the bill before it gets to the first reading. Don't forget, John Key said at the National Party conference a couple of weeks ago that actually they need to pull their heads in. They need to show some commitment to Māori and te tiriti.
Do we think that'll happen, Kendra? Or do you think that we'll still get the first reading of this bill and then after that New Zealand First, as the Ahorangi said, New Zealand First and National will just pull away?
Kia ora. I think at this stage it would be a surprise if the government were to pull back, from this trajectory that they've set themselves on. And the reason I say that is because of, the way that they've treated the fast-track bill, the potential repeal of Section 7AA of the Oranga Tamariki legislation and every other kind of anti-Māori, anti-te tiriti policy change that they've tried to push through. However, as they're well aware, they're going to be met, with kaha Māori, with mana Māori, if they do push forward with this.
Yeah, and I think the Koroneihana, Rahui Papa, got up and said, we reserve the right to fight and we'll continue to activate and things like that. David Seymour says he welcomes the report, quote unquote, welcomes the report and says we need the national conversation about the treaty. What do you think he means and how will Māori react to that kind of national conversation that he talks about?
Oh, which conversations he's talking about? He's been invited to, was invited to Koroneihana, was a no-show. He's been invited to other hui Māori and has not engaged in a conversation. So what we do know is what those words on paper are. And those words on paper is the ACT Party's draft of the Treaty Principles Bill doesn't reference Māori at all, which is clearly not what our tupuna signed up for.
Yeah, and do you think Chris Luxon will pay heed or take note of what the former Prime Minister, John Key said about trying to tone the racial issues, particularly Crown-Māori relations, down?
He would be unwise not to. He would be unwise given the trajectory of that government. He wants to be a two-term government, clearly, but he's heading on a path where that may not be possible.
The Tribunal report, Kendra, also recommended that the Crown should constitute a Cabinet Māori Crown Relations Committee that has oversight of the Crown's te tiriti treaty policies. Now, interestingly, the Te Arawhiti Minister, Tama Pōtaka, has announced that he's looking at some changes at Te Arawhiti. Can we take from that I think he will probably take that recommendation lightly, do you think? What is motivating this change, do you think, that Tama Pōtaka is?
I think really what's motivating this change, again, is the underlying politics of this coalition government. And as much as Tama Pōtaka has said, that as kind of Minister for Māori Affairs and things like that, he has the best interests of, te ao Māori at heart. He's talking about, positive changes apparently that he's trying to make in housing, social services, things like this. We need to look at what this government is actually doing and not only listen to the words that they're saying, because that's where we're going to see what their real intentions are.
Do you think he's been forced into this position because of the financial constraints that this government has clearly put on government departments, rationalisation, even retrenchment, some might say?
Yep. So we've heard there's going to be no funding for much of the work of Te Arawhiti. So to some extent that has been forced. But I agree with Kendra. I think much of this is just pure ideology, as many of this government's decisions have been. We don't care really which work stream sits with Te Puni Kōkiri or Te Arawhiti. Just that those things are done. But I would say that this is just an undoing of what former Minister Davis did, and I think that's all there is to it, that it's just undoing what a previous minister has done. But I can see the whakaaro behind Minister Davis's plan there, which was Arawhiti is a bridge. This is about the bridge to the future, and that treaty settlements are an encounter, but actually the Crown-Māori is a relationship, and relationships need to be, fostered just like we do with our own friends and our own family. They need to be tended to, nurtured, and brought along.
The question that's in my mind is, how would you characterise the Crown-Māori relationship at the moment?
At the moment, I would say it's almost an abusive relationship in many ways, right? I think that what you can see on the part of the Crown, is certainly a very controlling, and sort of coercive partnership in many ways. We can see through everything that this government has done over the past 8 months is the constant attacks and stripping of tino rangatiratanga and any steps towards true partnership and power sharing with Māori.
It's interesting you say, because again at the Koroneihana, Māori were very clear. Tuku Morgan and Rahui Papa said, stop the racist Māori bashing bills. And I think the Tribunal was essentially saying you have a Crown responsibility to talk and engage with Māori. I guess the question then comes, is that really going to happen, do you think, in this term of government? Or is the Prime Minister being dragged kicking and screaming into these issues by his coalition partners?
Well, to date it does seem like they have had, this is the tail wagging the dog, that they keep consistently referencing this coalition agreement. And Prime Minister Luxon repeated at the weekend that perhaps we're in a compromised position in relation to the Treaty Principles Bill that neither of us are happy with. Well, one of you could just actually show some kaha and exit.
Yeah. OK, I want to talk about Māori wards. Are you surprised by the response of many councils across Aotearoa who've actually been pretty staunch and said there are benefits to Māori wards and the work that we do, we want to keep them?
Carl, no, not surprised at all, because many councillors, actually do represent the will of the people that they have been elected to represent. And, Māori, kind of Māori views, auahatanga, creativity, Māori kind of views on environment and kaitiakitanga and those sorts of things can be seen by many people to be really positive. And also, I think that this kind of idea that much of, te ao Pākehā, tauiwi mā, are racist and are anti-Māori is actually not true. As much as this, many people within this coalition government and other kind of outside political forces and actors want to represent, te ao tauiwi that way, I actually don't think that's the case.
There will be local referenda. Do you think those referenda will uphold the position that many of these councils have about wanting to keep the Māori wards for the benefit of the communities that they serve?
That's going to be interesting. I've been really quite delighted at the number of councils that so far have affirmed in advance of those mandatory referenda.
In a pretty loud way. They have not been backward in coming forward about it.
In a celebratory way, and that draws a line in the sand for their populace to say, actually let's go with this. They've had 18 months, many of them, of their first Māori ward councillor, and they can see the benefit of that, as Kendra has said. So it's an opportunity for councils to say, yes, this is who we are and who we stand for in this particular rohe, and for us to mobilise and run with it.
At the risk of many people saying this is a stupid question to ask, Julian, I want to talk about Hobson's Pledge. And as many people will know, they had some direct advertising via the New Zealand Herald relating to the Marine and Coastal Area Act. Isn't this just a group expressing their right to free speech? Kendra?
In some ways, yes. right? Sure, everyone has a right to free speech. What you don't have a right to is to have absolutely no pushback, you know, to the things that you say. What you don't have a right to is to not be challenged on the things that you say. And people, very rightfully so, you know, have seen that particular ad in the Herald and, you know, past campaigns by Hobson's Pledge as well as very, very racist and very clearly anti-Māori. And so, yes, sure, they can say those things, but they can't say them and expect absolutely no pushback from Te Ao Māori, especially at a time when Māori feel under attack, you know, and are under attack.
And the misinformation is the word that everyone uses here.
So there are some. So yes, that they have a right to free speech and to the consequences of that speech, but you do not have the right to spread misinformation, untruths. So there are implications that, you know, that the foreshore is going to be that it is in return to public ownership. It's not in public ownership. That Māori are going to limit the rights of non-Māori to access and use of the foreshore and seabed. Again, these are all mistruths and misinformation. You cannot do that.
This was so good. Can we do this again next week?
Sounds good.
Let's do it again, shall we?
Ka pai.
E mihi ana kia kora. Tēnā kora. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming.
Kia ora.
Ngā mihi nui kia kora watahi. Kia mautonu mai e te iwi. After this, on Your Hui, a Ngāti whakaue artist whose mental health journey was healed with the help of clay. Kia ora mai anō. For Ngāti whakaue artist Caleb Ngātai, clay has become a way of life. You'll often find the Rotorua potter at local markets selling his unique cups. But his love of clay emerged from one of the most challenging times in his life. Caleb spoke to our reporter John Boynton about how clay helped him to heal.
What is it about working with clay that fills your cup?
Probably the coffee I put in it. Yeah. Nah, it's a whole thing about, just like the feeling of the clay in my hands, when I'm working with it on the wheel.
When Caleb Ngātai sits behind the clay wheel, he's taken to another world.
You start off with a ball of clay and then from there you can literally make anything. You are freeing your imagination.
The Ngāti Whakaue Uri is a potter and clay artist, a passion he discovered in one of the darkest times in his life.
I don't think I've really told too many people about it. So when I was living in Melbourne, I went over there just out of high school and I was making coffees. I had a manic episode, I freaked out my family. And then, ended up in hospital. And I was in there for a couple months and they diagnosed me with bipolar.
The 27-year-old spent the next year trying to pick up the pieces.
It's literally just a blur. They explained it to me as like having a car crash. But just like a car crash for your brain.
Pretty heavy.
Yeah, it was pretty heavy. I don't think about it too often. But I was literally in bed all day, no energy, depressed. That was that for like almost a year. And then I'd still have to work.
As part of his therapy, Caleb was invited to a creative studio in Melbourne.
There was music, textiles, painting, drawing, computers, and the other thing was pottery. I knew nothing about pottery at that time. And they were just like, oh, Caleb, did you want to give this a go to pottery? I was like, oh, yeah, okay. And then had a jam, really enjoyed it. I was like, wow, this is cool.
Working with clay helped him to emerge from the shadow of his depression.
I think even just the feeling of clay in your hands is just really good for you. It's good for the mind, like sort of slows your mind down, shuts it off, and you're just feeling this clay, you know, all your senses are just activated. But yeah, that was the whole start of it.
Returning home to Aotearoa during COVID, becoming another important step in his healing.
Just being back home, it's just a whole nother energy.
Caleb joined the Potters Club at the Rotorua Arts Village,
I've honestly met so many people just through being here.
where he's now working full-time.
I didn't realise how big the community was until just recently, and how many people show up to support. Put a pressure on the top so that your piece doesn't go flying off.
5 years after first picking up pottery, Caleb's now teaching night classes.
It's not easy. I do tell people that.
Looks like Tom's already got the hang of it.
I find that some people pick it up easier than others.
And it would be at the Arts Village where his business, Caleb's Cups, came to life.
So I make a whole bunch of ceramic cups, and yeah, hence the name Caleb's Cups.
Why'd you choose cups?
The fact that I was a barista before, and I was doing that for like 5 years.
His surroundings back home inspiring his designs.
Tried matching the lake, get a colour that matches the lake, and then even the colour of the sulphur. Been trying to get that as well, and the pink and white terraces.
You'll often see Caleb at markets in Rotorua, Whakatane and Tāmaki Makaurau.
Yeah. It's like walking on hot coals if you're quick enough.
Yeah.
A few people have told me that they feel the wairua in the day when I'm making it. Just turning the brain off and just going with what I feel. So my wairua is in every piece I make.
Each cup holding a part of the journey he's taken so far.
I still pick them up all the time and have a look at all my pieces I've made. I'm like, that's wicked. Yeah.
Has been able to create with clay and become an artist helped you to feel like you're not defined by your mental health or by bipolar?
I don't define myself by that at all. I'm just Caleb. I guess that's the sort of the only label that I sort of define myself as.
Instead, he's grateful for the role of clay in moulding the person he is today.
It's been a pretty long journey. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon either.
Ngā mihi nui e hoa e clay and e mihi atu ana ki te whanau Ngāti Whakaue. Now last week we brought to you the story of Ngāti Kahukura Whitia, a small Wairarapa hapu with big dreams. They were trying to raise $100,000 to develop their Papakāinga housing model te wharehangahanga. Amber Craig and her team had only a few days, but they did it, raising more than $120,000. Awesome, eh? That is our hui tonight. We have another hui, Aotearoa kia mau, ki te tūranga o Taputupu Aotea haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.
te reo, te take.
Nā te puna whakatongarewa, te hui, I tautoko.